One of the things that many people have to deal with all the time is comparison and criticism. And why do people criticize and compare? If it's a parent or a teacher, the goal might be to try and inspire someone. They might believe that their words are motivation. They might bring up another student, a kid who is more accomplished, who has better grades, hoping that it will drive the person they are talking to improve. But there are two core lessons I've learned over the years. One, you can't force people to do things. And two, criticism only serves to annoy and aggravate people. You can threaten someone to the point where they will do whatever you say, but as soon as their back is turned, they'll go right back to what they were doing previously. Criticism, instead of being constructive, often just creates hostility when there was none before. And the outcome is usually anger and resentment rather than growth. And these two concepts, they can be especially apparent in Asian cultures, where it is deeply rooted in social interactions. It really is not uncommon for family members and relatives in Asian cultures to discuss people right in front of the person they're comparing. Your relatives will often compare you to students, cousins, friends. They'll talk about your looks, your weight, your performance in class. Almost nothing is off the table. And in Asia, students' test scores are usually publicly posted so that the people with the lowest scores can be shamed. This is just something that is part of the culture at the moment. That criticism, comparison, and fear will lead to motivation and in turn, greater successes in life. I'm here to argue that this is pointless in the grand scheme of things. And as usual, I have a story to share about why. I spend a lot of times talking about stories about myself, but today I wanted to turn it around and talk about one of my friends that inspired me greatly while growing up. One of my oldest friends is a guy I've known since the 5th grade. Let's call him James. And as a kid, James was always a really cheerful person, a really fun person to be around. He had an electric, infectious energy that would sometimes cross over the line into troublemaker in the eyes of our teachers. And like me, he wasn't the most focused on his schoolwork and he wasn't the most gifted academically. And because of this, he was a target of our teachers for comparison and criticism. And in particular, he was compared to his older brother John, who was 1 year older and the polar opposite of James. Ever since John was a kid, he was known as the smart kid. The kid who was gifted to the core. Schoolwork, tests, anything academic related didn't even seem to faze him in the slightest. He had no real visible emotion, and he never caused any trouble in his classes, which made him a standout to other kids, parents, and teachers. Two brothers, polar opposites. One who was adored by all, and the other who was always living in the shadow. And growing up, I would always watch as our teachers would openly criticize my friend and compare him to his brother. Whenever James acted out, performed poorly on a test, or wasn't paying attention in class, the response was always the same. Our teachers would say things like, "John would never do this. Did you know John aced this exact same test last year? You should really try to be more like John." Even though I wasn't the one being personally compared, it still made me mad to hear all of this. And throughout the rest of middle school, high school, the comparisons would come all the same. Teachers, parents, other students just couldn't help themselves but to make comments. John was always in honors classes, James was always in regular classes. John always had perfect grades, James didn't. John seemed good at everything he tried, James didn't. It seemed like everyone had something to say about the two of them, where they were going in life, where they would end up, their trajectories. I remember it frustrating my friend every time it happened. I don't know how deeply the comparisons affected him in day-to-day life, but I know what it didn't do. It didn't change him. The criticism and the comparison, he seemed to funnel it into other avenues. And in our sophomore year of high school, it funneled into escape in the form of video games and distractions. I remember that year, my friend was obsessed with this one game. He would tell me every day going home about how much he loved it, designing custom characters, obsessively playing for hours and hours and hours. He was aware that school was important, but after watching years of his brother just casually excelling in all his classes, he probably felt he could do the same thing effortlessly, without trying. And that semester, he ended up with barely passing grades in all his classes. And to some people, that might not seem like a big deal. But for a school like ours, so heavily focused on school, college, and the future, anything deviating from perfection is a massive mark on your chances of getting into a top tier college. And at the same time, his home life became tumultuous because of events he couldn't really control. And because of that, he was left to deal with all his problems on his own. I never asked him specifically about how he felt during this time, but I could tell his mood shifted dramatically just from the time we spent together. I don't know what he told himself during that time, but I do know what he did. During that time, he changed. And the reason for his change, it wasn't because some teacher or a parent criticized him in just the right way to the point where he had enough of it. It wasn't because the comparisons to his brother finally got to his head. His drive to change, his need to change, it all came from a burning desire within. It came from a desire and a will to make improvements to himself because he wasn't happy about what he was seeing in his life and that he wanted to fix it. And that year and the following, I saw him transform into one of the most disciplined people I had seen in my life. In some ways, he was no longer relatable to me. I was still lazy, a slacker. He was no longer. I wasn't taking honors classes. He was able to test into all of them. I didn't have straight A's. He had perfect grades from that point until the end of school. Years and years later, I still think about his journey and how he transformed himself. And even to this day, it still inspires me. He focused on what was important to him, cut out the things in his life that he felt like were a waste of time, built incredible work ethic, took the hardest classes, and was successful in almost every avenue. Not because he was gifted and his brain suddenly decided to let him process information faster, but because he put in the work day after day, building systems, working hard, and working towards his goals. I think he took that mark on his record and at a time where he was at a low in his high school life and used it to reinvent himself. And all the while during this transformation, he still kept his great attitude he had ever since he was a kid. And meanwhile, his brother was operating in the exact same way he had always been. Still at the top of the class. John was still breezing through school, scoring perfectly on all his tests, racing his way to become valedictorian, joining sports teams, clubs, getting internships in high school. Everyone knew who this guy was and where he was going in life. And with that, everyone had the highest of expectations for his brother. He had always been known as the effortless genius, and I think he based a lot of his personality and pride off of that. The point of this story was to explain the trajectories different people take in their life. One person was naturally gifted and breezed through life. One became the hardworking person you see because of circumstance and an internal drive to succeed. And so you might ask, where did the two of them end up? The smart older brother had his sights set on the top schools in the country. Ivy League schools, Stanford, and everything in between. But the competition, it is fierce. The application pool for schools like that are filled with people who were the smartest person growing up, who were valedictorian of the school, who scored perfectly on their SATs. He ended up going to one of the top public universities in the country. But even then, it was short of the monumental expectations others had set for him. And over the years, the pressure of him not being the smartest person in the room anymore slowly took a toll on his health. Because in life, there's always someone smarter and better than you. And it's about how we take that in stride that makes us stronger. My friend instead, he focused his college applications on a different angle. The journey of self-discovery, growth, and discipline. He was able to talk about his life, the struggles he had with schoolwork, and finally, the moment that caused him to change himself. He was able to craft a story with his grades, his scores, and his trajectory in life. He was able to prove to the top universities in the nation that he was on a path to the top, and that his emotional maturity and his work ethic far outweighed anyone in that applicant pool. Both brothers, they succeeded in different ways, on wildly different paths. One of them might have felt like he fell short of his expectations, while the other felt like he had wildly exceeded his expectations. But at the end of the day, they both ended up in around the same place. Both of them going to top tier universities, both of them studying software related degrees in college, and both of them graduating college and working at large, notable software companies. And so I ask again, what was the point of all that comparison? What was the point of teachers, parents, and other people comparing the two of them for 12 to 18 years of their lives? Why not let people travel their own paths and pave their own roads. Why don't we as teachers and as mentors focus on fostering strengths rather than criticism and comparison? The only way people change is if they want to change themselves. This story has always been an inspiring one for me to understand the difference between hard work and talent, and something that I hope will resonate with someone out there.